My wife and I were obviously just a marriage on paper. But the second I brought up the D word, divorce, she completely lost her mind. Jerk. Bastard. Divorce? Not happening. She didn't just hijack my suitcase like an angry TSA agent. She actually called a locksmith in the middle of the night to weld my bedroom door shut. Even when her precious childhood crush returned from overseas, she told him to kick rocks. And to think she got into a horrific car crash years ago just trying to save that very same guy. We got married on paper, and I spent 3 solid years acting as her personal Florence Nightingale. To her, I was just her #1 fanboy. Only later did she realize that he was actually the substitute all along. But when I finally packed my bags and left, the cold, arrogant Aries lost all her sass. Caspian, I can't live without you. Please, please come back. 6 p.m. I cooked up a 6-dish, 1-soup feast, tailored just right for Serafina's incredibly picky tastes. 7 p.m. I ran her bath, arranging her favorite roses and aromatherapy candles like a 5-star spa concierge. I set Serafina's slippers at the perfect angle by the entrance. 9 p.m. The front door swung open, and she walked in. I rushed over to greet her, taking her coat while gently sliding the slippers onto her feet. Once her coat was hung up, I asked if she wanted to eat or shower first. Keeping her eyes glued to her phone, she casually muttered that she would shower first. On the wall, the hour hand of the clock slowly swept halfway around. Serafina stepped out of the bathroom in a soft bathrobe, towel drying her hair. I immediately handed her some fresh pajamas, and while she changed, I rushed to the kitchen to plate the reheated food. She was completely accustomed to me acting as her personal butler. She seemed in a suspiciously great mood, glued to her phone and obviously texting someone. When I set down the bowls and chopsticks, I caught a quick glimpse of her glowing screen. Julian. His name was pinned right at the top of her chat list. It stared back at me, but I calmly looked away and headed back to the kitchen. Suddenly, my own phone buzzed. I pulled it out to see a call from Mrs. Sterling, Serafina's mother. The second I answered, Mrs. Sterling's voice came through the line. She asked if I was really going to divorce Serafina. I watched a burst of fireworks bloom outside the window before softly replying that she already knew the truth. We were only ever together because of that written agreement. Now the contract is up, and Julian is divorced and back in the country. She is thrilled, and she definitely doesn't need me now. Mrs. Sterling let out a long, heavy sigh on the other end, sounding deeply sorry. You have been wronged all this time. I know how much you suffered. I really hoped that after all your years of devotion, she would fall for you. But never mind. Since Julian is back, I don't have to worry. 5 years ago, you gave up studying overseas just to care for Serafina. If you still want to go, I can pull some strings to set it up. I stared at the glowing fireworks, my eyes losing focus for a second. For 5 long years, because of Serafina, my own life had been entirely on hold. I nodded slowly. Thank you so much. Please go ahead and arrange it. I want to leave as quickly as possible. Once we hung up, the colorful fireworks outside slowly melted into the darkness. Just like my 5-year train wreck of a marriage, which was finally hitting a dead end. I grew up poor, and it was only because the Sterling Group sponsored my education that I could succeed academically. I even locked down the single exchange student spot available at my university. So, before heading overseas, I paid a special visit to the Sterling family to thank them. They sponsored plenty of other kids, but I was the very first one to show up in person and say thank you. That gesture made Mrs. Sterling, who had planned to dismiss me with a few polite words, stop and really look at me. Hearing my plans, she sat in silence for a long moment before telling me that if I truly wanted to repay them, I should do her a solid. That was when I learned the whole tragic soap opera between Serafina and Julian. Serafina was a golden girl, born straight into extreme wealth, and she and Julian had grown up together as childhood sweethearts. Anyone with eyes could see she was completely head over heels for him, but Julian preferred a slow, steady kind of romance. Once they finished college, she figured the time had finally come to confess her feelings, but out of nowhere, Julian got a girlfriend and ran off overseas with her. Blinded by shock, Serafina chased him to the airport in the dead of night, only to end up in a horrific car crash halfway there. By the time she woke up from surgery, Julian had already rushed into a marriage with that woman overseas. After that, she just shut herself inside her room, day after day. This high-achieving golden girl instantly crumbled into a depressed hermit. That was exactly when I knocked on their door. Mrs. Sterling decided to use me as a human rehab clinic to cure her daughter of heartbreak. To pay back my debt, I passed on studying abroad and signed a 5-year contract with Mrs. Sterling. At a banquet, I staged a clumsy collision with Serafina, faked love at first sight, and chased her like a man possessed. Soon, everyone in high society knew she had a guy in her shadow who was completely, desperately obsessed with her. Over time, Serafina got hooked on my constant devotion until she made a reckless bet with her wealthy friends aboard a yacht. Whichever guy dared to dive into the freezing sea to fetch a throne ring would win a massive plot of prime northern land. I knew she was losing sleep for weeks, desperate to get her hands on that specific property. While the rich playboys shrank back from the violent, towering waves, I plunged right into the dark water without hesitation. That was the very first time Serafina showed any real concern for me. She squeezed my dripping, shivering body as they pulled me out, her voice shaking with terror and muffled tears. She told me we should get married and that she would try to love me, but I eventually learned the bitter truth. She only proposed because earlier that day, Julian had shared a picture of himself kissing his wife under the northern lights. Still, to honor my agreement and help her erase Julian, I spent every day treating her like a queen. Once, I discovered she had always wanted to see a meteor shower, but her workaholic parents never had the time. I spent 6 months searching for the ultimate mountain peak to watch the stars. I sat there freezing until dawn, but she stood me up. I found out later she had gone straight to find Julian. By that point, Julian's marriage was falling apart. That was when she began flying abroad every single week. She would curate all sorts of unique, thoughtful presents and leave them at his doorstep to cheer him up. Naturally, she hid all of this from me. The day Julian finally flew back home, she sped down the highway like a lunatic to see him first and ended up rolling her car over. I spent 3 days and 3 nights sleeplessly watching over her hospital bed. But in her sleep, she called out Julian's name exactly 999 times. Right then, I knew that saving this girl was an impossible task I could never pull off. Luckily, our 5-year agreement was ending this July. Julian was officially divorced and back in town. She finally had her true love back, meaning it was my time to step aside. We could both finally start fresh, completely separate. "Who are you talking to?" Realizing I had been in the kitchen too long, she came in and caught me staring blankly at the screen. I jerked awake and lied, saying it was nobody. Late that night, as I lay listening to her quiet breathing beside me, I stared up at the dark ceiling, completely sleepless. By morning, she looked down at the Western-style breakfast I made and scowled. "You know I cannot stand Western breakfast. Why did you cook this?" I looked down, picked up my fork, and slowly chewed a piece of steak, trying to buy time. I told her it was the only thing left in the fridge, but that was a lie. I was actually preparing my stomach for living overseas. Thankfully, she didn't care enough to question me. She just sat with her eyes glued to her phone, waiting for a message. I didn't have to ask. I already knew exactly who she wanted to hear from. The screen lit up, and she snatched it instantly. Whatever Julian sent must have been funny, because she lit right up. Her normally icy, stoic expression softened into a genuine, warm smile. I watched her silently for a moment before retrieving the divorce papers I had drafted months ago. Since the day I signed her mother's contract, I had planned for this exact second. Finally, I was getting my freedom. "Serafina, let's get a divorce." I said it calmly, like I was just checking the daily forecast. She was so deeply invested in texting Julian she barely even heard me, just letting out a distracted hum, just a soft MHM. I wasn't surprised at all. For 5 whole years, this was exactly how she treated me. Hot one day, freezing cold the next. Now that he was back, she cut off the last tiny scrap of attention she had left. I turned to the final page of the paperwork, slid it over with a pen, and tapped the signature line. "Sign here." She just hummed back, too busy typing to even look down. She grabbed the pen with one hand and scribbled her signature exactly where I pointed, while her other hand kept furiously tapping away at her screen. I took the papers and quietly let her know, after the 1-month cooling-off period, I will be gone. Serafina just gave another empty grunt, set her knife and fork down, stood up, and got ready to head out. Watching her walk away, I finally had to call out, "Serafina, do you even have any idea what I just said?" She stopped, turned, and looked at me with genuine confusion. "Wasn't it about sending supplies to the orphanage? The contract she just signed? Wasn't that what you mentioned a few days ago? What's wrong?" I laughed mockingly in my head. I had already gotten her to sign that orphanage agreement last month. Clearly, she didn't care about me at all, and she hadn't heard a single word I said. But none of that mattered now. It is what it is. "Serafina, have a nice life with your precious Julian." I just smiled. Nothing. I lied. That afternoon, I followed the delivery truck straight to the orphanage. Once the heavy lifting was done, I walked over to the director's office to say my goodbyes. I told her I was heading abroad to study. She was absolutely thrilled. I had originally been the top student in the fine arts department. When I gave up that dream years ago, she had grieved it deeply. "Caspian," she cried. "This is wonderful news." The director held my hand, beaming with pride, but then a shadow of worry crossed her face. "But if you go overseas, won't that separate you from Serafina? Long distance is incredibly hard on a marriage, you know." I stared out the window at the kids laughing and playing, then shook my head. "We aren't just separated, we're divorced." The director froze, then sighed heavily. She told me she had honestly seen this coming from the very start. That marriage was never built to last. If she actually loved you, how could she never visit this place with you once in all these years? It's better this way, I said, hugging her tightly. Yes, it really is for the best. When I got back, I headed straight upstairs to the walk-in closet and started packing my bags. Only then did I realize how pathetic my wardrobe actually was. I only owned the few clothes Mrs. Sterling bought me right after the wedding. In 5 years of marriage, Serafina had never once thought to buy me a single piece of clothing. Once my few things were packed, I gathered every single gift I had bought her over the years and sold them to a scrap collector. For years, I had carefully chosen endless birthday gifts, desperately trying to win her heart. She never even glanced at them. They were just tossed into a dark corner, buried under a thick layer of dust. As the scrap truck drove away, I turned to walk back inside the mansion, but a sudden car horn blasted right behind me. I spun around to see a sleek Maybach pull up right in front of me. A woman in a flashy red dress stepped out. It was none other than my spoiled, bratty sister-in-law, Beatrix. Beatrix watched the truck disappear, snorted coldly, and sneered at me. "Typical slum kid," she mocked. "You actually have to sell old cardboard boxes for spare change." I completely ignored her and walked away. Beatrix stopped smiling and lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Caspian," she barked. Ever since marrying in, I had always desperately tried to please them. I had never ignored her like this before. Now that I dared to walk away, a furious rage instantly flared up inside her. "Are you deaf? Didn't you hear me talking to you?" she screeched. I yanked my arm back, glaring at her with pure annoyance. Beatrix had always hated me, believing a peasant like me had no business marrying a Sterling. So for 5 years, making my life miserable had been her favorite hobby. She would throw away the breakfasts I cooked or stomp all over the fresh laundry I had just washed. But now that I was finally getting free, I was done putting up with her. Beatrix was about to scream, but she suddenly stopped, giving me a nasty smirk and saying that selling trash suited a guy like me. "You probably don't know yet, but my sister's first love is back," she sneered. "You, the worthless squatter, are finally getting kicked out." Right as she said that, a man wearing a clean white shirt stepped out from behind her. This was my first time seeing Julian in person. He was incredibly handsome, and 5 years of a broken marriage hadn't left a single scratch on him. No wonder Serafina had pined for him all this time. Hearing her, Julian walked over and gently took Beatrix by the arm. "Beatrix, don't talk to Caspian like that," he said. "He is still your brother-in-law." "What brother-in-law?" Beatrix snapped. "Julian, I told you in the car my sister only loves you, and she never forgot you all these years. She flew overseas every single week to see you, and all those gifts were bought by her." After her dramatic little speech, Beatrix turned her glare back to me and barked in order. "Why are you just standing there like a statue? Move it and bring Julian's bags inside." My sister already said he could stay. I looked at the bags, ignored them completely, and just walked straight past. Behind me, Beatrix threw a massive fit, forcing the poor driver to carry the luggage inside. Beatrix was ready to fight us when Serafina suddenly burst through the door. The moment she saw Julian sitting completely fine on the couch, she let out a massive sigh of relief. She turned to me, explaining that Julian's house had been empty for years and needed major repairs, so he was staying with us. I said nothing. In the heavy silence, Julian stood up, looking extremely nervous, and suggested he should leave. Since it was our marital home, he claimed I looked upset. Serafina immediately grabbed his arm to stop him. She told him there was no need to go, as I never got mad over small things. Quietly watching their little drama play out, I spoke up with a slight smirk. She was absolutely right. I would never get upset over something so small. "Please make yourself at home, Julian. Soon enough, this entire place will be yours anyway." Afraid Julian might actually leave, Serafina quickly ordered his bags moved to the master guest room. Beatrix smirked with smug satisfaction, turning to give me a cold glare. "Why are you still standing there? Go cook dinner. And remember, Julian can't handle spice, so keep it completely bland." Even with our household staff, I always handled the kitchen because Serafina was ridiculously picky and had extremely high standards. She wouldn't touch dishes made by Michelin star chefs. Somehow, only my food was edible. But no matter how much love I put into my cooking, she would only take a few cold, uninterested bites. Sometimes Beatrix would join us just to complain about everything, but this time, I calmly shook my head and uttered 4 words that stunned them all. "I can't do it." At my refusal, Serafina's head snapped toward me in pure shock. Before she could speak, Julian's eyes welled with tears as he sobbed that it was all his fault for moving in. He whimpered about being an outsider and how it was wrong to make me cook. He turned to go pack, but Serafina instantly yanked him back. She told him it wasn't his fault, then turned a dark, furious glare on me. "Didn't you just claim you weren't angry? What exactly is this little stunt about?" I calmly raised my left hand, showing off 2 band-aids strategically placed on my fingers, and said I couldn't touch water for a while. The truth was, I wasn't hurt at all. Our contract was up, and I refused to waste any more energy on her. So, I threw some band-aids on my fingers as an easy excuse to get out of cooking. The room went dead silent. Since I normally handled everything, we had already sent the maids home for the evening. At this point, nobody else in the villa even knew how to boil an egg, and calling the staff back would take forever. Beatrix scoffed in annoyance, complaining about why I hadn't mentioned the injury earlier if it was so serious. She asked if I was trying to starve them on purpose and stepped forward to scream, but Julian held her back. Telling her to stop, he turned his best puppy dog eyes directly on Serafina. Julian mentioned how much he missed that old high school hot pot spot after being away for so long. He reminded her how they used to eat there after class and suggested they all go grab hot pot tonight. Of course, Serafina could never say no to him. Her voice softened instantly as she agreed to go, but they still dragged me along. During the drive, Serafina chatted happily with the other two in the back, laughing about their high school glory days. Julian got happier and happier as they talked, while Beatrix threw in her own comments. When someone brought up a funny memory, they all burst out laughing. Suddenly, Julian remembered I was in the car. He looked over with a fake, apologetic smile and said he was sorry. He said they weren't ignoring me on purpose, I just wasn't part of those memories. I thought to myself that I wouldn't be part of their future either. I just grunted in response and closed my eyes. Serafina actually glanced over at me for once. Deep down, she felt that something about me had completely shifted. Once we parked, I made an excuse to head to the restroom and splashed freezing water on my face. Staring into the mirror, my face couldn't hide the heavy, deep exhaustion weighing down my eyes. We both had 5-year marriages, but Julian's eyes were full of life while I looked like a complete zombie. Just hang on a little longer and I will be totally free, I whispered to myself. Back in the private room, the three of them had already ordered clear and mild broth. Julian does not eat meat, so bring extra veggies and absolutely no cilantro. Serafina ordered for him. Even after all these years, she remembered his dietary quirks flawlessly. Caspian, do you have any allergies? 5 years. This was the first time she ever asked what I like to eat. I sat across from them, pulled out a tissue, and quietly wiped my bowl. Anything is fine, just no seafood. Throughout the dinner, Serafina only had eyes for Julian next to her. She barely ate a single bite herself, spending all her time putting food onto his plate. Halfway through, a violent argument broke out at the table right next to ours. Things escalated fast. Soon, they were standing up and throwing wild punches. Other customers rushed over to stop the brawl, but nobody expected one of the hot-headed fighters to suddenly grab a massive pot of boiling soup and hurl it at his opponent. His target ducked perfectly. With terrible luck, that flying pot of molten broth sailed straight for our table. Amidst the screaming, Serafina lunged to shield Julian. I could not dodge in time. A massive wave of boiling spicy broth crashed directly over me. Instantly, I was drenched in scalding oil. My arm turned violently red, blistering up in seconds. 10,000 hot needles stabbed my flesh all at once. It hurt too much to even speak. Serafina quickly let go of Julian and rushed toward me, and for the first time, I saw genuine panic in her eyes as she asked if it hurt. She promised to take me to the hospital, but the sheer agony left me completely unable to speak. Oh my God, Julian is hurt, Beatrix shrieked, dragging Serafina's attention right back to him. I looked over. Julian had a grand total of 3 tiny drops of chili oil on his arm, which apparently looked absolutely life-threatening to them. Julian pulled his arm back, shaking his head. I am fine, he looks much worse. You should take him to the hospital first. What do you mean you are fine? You have been coddled since childhood. Even a paper cut hurts you for a whole day, Beatrix yelled. Sister, what are you waiting for? Take Julian to the hospital right now. Beatrix stomped her feet, pointing an angry, warning finger at the brawlers. Are you psychos out of your minds? Go fight outside. You hurt Julian. My sister will absolutely destroy you. Julian apparently could not bear the excruciating pain of those 3 tiny oil drops anymore. He sucked in a sharp breath but kept playing the martyr, telling Serafina to check on me instead. Seeing him like this broke Serafina's heart. She completely forgot I was even there. Ignoring her husband melting in front of her, she grabbed Julian and ran. Right before leaving, almost as an afterthought, she threw me a guilty look. Caspian, Julian has sensitive skin. He is terrified of pain. The hospital is close. Just take a cab yourself, okay? Only when the 3 of them vanished did I snap out of my shock, struggling against the blinding agony. Seeing me badly injured and abandoned, a kind waiter rushed over, apologizing profusely while giving me basic first aid. After taking painkillers, the burning torture subsided just enough so I could finally speak. I borrowed some dry clothes from him, changed, and stumbled out to hail a cab to the hospital. The doctor pressed a cotton swab against my blisters, instructing me to apply ointment daily to prevent scarring. I squeezed my eyes shut. 2 nurses pushed a cart past, talking loudly. Honestly, CEO Sterling is incredibly devoted to Julian. It was only a few drops of hot oil, but she booked the entire VIP floor and called in every top dermatologist for a consultation. Right? If they came any later, those tiny wounds would have healed on their own. Must be nice to find a woman that caring. Keep dreaming, because a woman like her is a once-in-a-million-years catch. A once-in-a-million-years catch, I whispered with a bitter smile. Imagine leaving your severely burned husband behind to cuddle another man's paper cut. Truly a rare phenomenon. Once my burns were fully wrapped up, I thanked the doctor and walked out. The moment I stepped outside the hospital, a notification popped up on my phone. It was an acceptance letter from the overseas university I had applied to, reminding me to prepare an original painting for registration. After 5 long years, I finally picked up a paintbrush. I bought some canvases and paints, but I did not go back to the Sterling mansion. Instead, I headed to Mount Lanu for its breathtaking scenery. A quiet lake sat tucked away in the mountains. Its water was like glass, reflecting the peaks, a real masterpiece. I took a long, deep breath. The heavy weight of the last 5 years vanished in a second, leaving pure, absolute freedom. Inspiration hit me like sudden lightning. The moment my brush touched the blank paper, a stunning landscape came alive. No chaos, no screaming, just birds singing and the quiet rustle of the wind. For 3 whole days, I lost myself in the art. I only powered my phone back on after hiking down the mountain to mail my painting to the university. The instant it turned on, a massive flood of missed calls and unread texts took over the screen. Every single alert was from Serafina. Unbelievable. Normally, I was the one chasing her with calls and texts. She never called, and she definitely never called back. While I stood there staring at the screen in confusion, Beatrix called. I picked up, and her loud voice instantly screamed through the phone, asking where the hell I was hiding. She screamed, asking if I knew her sister was going crazy looking for me, warning me that playing hard to get wouldn't work, telling me to keep dreaming because the role of the man of the house belonged to Julian. She aggressively hung up. I just frowned. Did I actually hear that right? Serafina was losing her mind looking for me. Why would she ever look for me? I wondered if Beatrix needed her medication checked, but the 108 missed calls from Serafina proved she was desperately searching for me. Holding this strange mystery close, I grabbed my drawing pad and headed home. The very second I got out of the car, the mansion maids surrounded me. Their faces looked like they had just survived the end of the world, and some were close to tears as they cried that I was finally back. They complained that the house was a total disaster without me, and their boss had been furious about everything they did. Apparently, she had been throwing tantrums for days. Hearing that, it made perfect sense she missed having me as her personal servant. Well, she better get used to it quickly, because I was going to leave for good very soon. She would have to survive without me for the rest of her life. After calming the maids down, I walked inside to find the house completely dark. Nobody had turned on the lights. Serafina sat alone on the couch, looking up as she heard me walking in. She stared at me for a long, quiet moment, trying to hide the irritation in her voice when she spoke. Asking where I had been all this time, I calmly took off my coat and said I was sketching in the mountains. She frowned, asking when I started caring about art. I thought to myself that I had always been a top art student. If I had not stayed behind to clear her family's debt, I would have gone overseas to become a famous painter years ago. I did not feel like explaining any of that to her. I just poured some water and told her I simply felt like going. Watching my cold reaction, Serafina rubbed her head and brought up the hot pot incident. She claimed she did not leave me on purpose, but Julian was sensitive, hated pain, and bled easily from minor cuts. Because they grew up together, she was used to watching over him, which is why she rushed him to the hospital first. Pointing out that I did not protest back then, she asked why I was throwing a fit and leaving. She told me Julian had already moved into his newly remodeled place, so I should stop acting childish over something so small. She sounded completely accusatory by the end. I could not tell if she was mad at me for leaving, or angry that my reaction forced her beloved Julian to move out so quickly. Frankly, I did not care. I gave a quiet shrug, set down my water, and started heading upstairs when she called out that she was starving. She ordered me to make her food, but I just showed her my bandaged left hand, and asked if she forgot that I was hurt too. Serafina winced, but I did not hang around to see it. I just turned and went straight upstairs. Days later, I walked out of my room and was met with a high-end luxury watch pushed right in front of me. I looked at Serafina, totally confused. Coughing nervously, she mentioned the hot pot accident, explaining she had been too occupied with Julian to check on me. Offering it as an apology, she showed me the incredibly expensive watch inside its velvet box. Mixed feelings rushed through me. 5 years. 5 entire years, and this was the very first gift she had ever bought for me. It was nothing but a pity prize for abandoning me while I was on fire, just so she could baby her childhood crush over a scratch. Then I remembered the massive pile of expensive presents sitting in her office. Every single one was carefully picked out for Julian, I felt a wave of absolute disgust, but hid it quickly. I would have done anything for a gift before, but I did not want it now. Seeing me hesitate, she assumed I just disliked the style. Lately, I have been so swamped with Julian's moving arrangements that I just had my assistant buy the priciest watch at the auction. If you do not like it, but before Serafina could even finish, Beatrix's screech echoed from outside. Julian, I told you my sister loves you to death. You should not have moved out. But even if you did, you should visit more. She babbled while dragging Julian into the house. When her eyes landed on the watch in my hand, she shrieked in absolute delight. Oh my God, Julian, didn't you just say you love this exact model? I cannot believe my sister actually bought it for you. She then shot an envious glance at Julian. Hearing this, Julian looked at Serafina with pleasant surprise, but I noticed the hesitation in her eyes. Without a single hesitation, I snatched the watch from her grip and basically shoved it into Julian's hands. Since it was bought for you, please take it. With one sentence, I made the choice, solving her little dilemma. For the very first time, Serafina's gaze did not instantly lock onto Julian. Instead, she could not help but stare at me. For some reason, seeing me act so generously made her feel profoundly uncomfortable. She felt I was completely different from before, but could not pinpoint why. A week later, our divorce cooling-off period finally ended. I could finally escape. I started packing my bags. Halfway through, her assistant dropped off a custom-made tuxedo for a banquet at the main estate. Looking at the suit, I laughed. Legally, our relationship was officially over. Yet, Serafina was completely oblivious. I wanted to refuse, but considering how much Mrs. Sterling had helped me over the years, and since I needed to pick up my overseas documents from her anyway, I decided to suit up and attend. Inside the dazzling banquet hall, wealthy heirs surrounded Julian to hype him up, saying CEO Sterling really loved him so much. They talked about his watch being a global limited edition piece from a high-end auction, symbolizing the only true love in the world. They heard some mystery billionaire dropped a fortune on it, never expecting it to be CEO Sterling. They could not believe she was still so hung up on him, recalling how she escorted him everywhere back in school, how all the chocolates and snacks in his desk were secretly planted by her. They laughed about the time they fought and she begged literally everyone for advice on how to win him back. She even came crying with bloodshot eyes. Just a few days of him ignoring her had almost ended her life. They told Julian nobody on earth loved him more, adding how completely devastated she was when he first eloped. And when she heard he was unhappy abroad, she flew out every single week just to watch him and leave gifts. Now that they were divorced, they all agreed she was never really into her husband anyway. They cheered for them to get together and kiss. Amidst the noisy, cheering crowd, I stood quietly in a dark corner, watching this ridiculous romantic comedy unfold, listening to people talk about how deeply my wife loved another man. Caspian, a sudden voice shattered my train of thought. I turned to see who it was. I nearly called her mom out of habit but remembered the situation and corrected myself. Mrs. Sterling. Hearing the formal title, she sighed but did not correct me, handing over a thick envelope containing my study documents. Caspian, I have arranged absolutely everything you will need for your trip. The semester starts early over there, so I already booked your flight. It takes off in 3 hours. She asked if there was anything else she could do, as I looked at the papers, feeling a massive weight lift. Just thinking about regaining my freedom and starting a brand new life made my hands tremble slightly. Taking a deep breath, I hid my excitement, tucked the envelope into my bag, and shook my head, thanking Mrs. Sterling. Doing this much is already more than enough. I paused, remembering something, and added that I had one tiny request. If Serafina ever asks where I went, please, you have to tell her that you have absolutely no idea. I hope we never cross paths again in this lifetime. Hearing this, Mrs. Sterling looked shocked and asked if I had not told her I was leaving. Tell her what? Tell her that my initial pursuit of her was nothing but a total lie? Or that my 6 years of intense devotion was not love, but just a job to pay off a debt, following her mother's orders to make her forget Julian? Or should I tell her that I am divorcing her, boarding a flight across the globe, and never coming back? Honestly, what was the point? Her first love was back. She would not even notice I was gone. I smiled and said there was no need. I just want to leave quickly without causing any drama. Leave? Who is leaving? A female voice suddenly interrupted from behind. I spun around and ran straight into Serafina's intense, searching eyes. My chest tightened up. I opened my mouth to say something, but I had no idea how much she had caught. Luckily, Mrs. Sterling stepped in to save me, asking Serafina why she was over here. Serafina let it go. She just looked over at the massive cake on the stage. Mom, it is time to go cut the cake. Mrs. Sterling rubbed her temples, politely declining because she was not feeling well. She told us to go ahead, then let the maids help her upstairs. Watching her mother walk away, Serafina held out her hand to me. Let us go cut the cake. I shook my head, lifting my bandaged hand. No thanks, it still hurts. You should go find Julian. Total confusion flashed across her eyes. She could not comprehend why I would say that. It was like her puppet strings had suddenly been cut. Why would I ask him? She looked completely and utterly baffled. I mean, she used to dump me for Julian every single time. For 5 years, she flew across the globe for him without a second thought. Now that I was literally handing him to her on a silver platter, she acted like I had just suggested a crime. I gave her a small smile. You two are close. It is just cutting a cake, no big deal. My smile was genuine, not bitter, which clearly threw her off. Still, she did not argue. She walked over to Julian and whispered something in his ear. Julian turned bright red but nodded, taking her arm as they stepped onto the stage. Side by side, they gripped the knife and cut into the cake. With romantic piano music playing, they leaned so close it looked less like a birthday party and more like they were cutting their own wedding cake. Midway through the party, the older crowd headed home, leaving only the younger generation behind. These rich heirs grew up with Serafina and knew all about her history with Julian. Seeing them together like newlyweds triggered massive applause. A few troublemakers started clapping and chanting for them to kiss. Julian's face flushed red as a tomato, and even Serafina's ears turned pink. She did not kiss him, but she did not stop the chanting either. I did not care. I pulled out my phone, plotting my quiet exit. If my flight was leaving in 3 hours, I had to get moving immediately. But everyone misread my quiet screen, scrolling as tragic, heartbroken silence. Suddenly, Beatrix strutted over with a group of snobby rich kids, giggling maliciously. When I finally looked up, they had me completely cornered. Beatrix smirked at me. Caspian, so what if you have been married to my sister for years? You are still just a loser standing here watching her and Julian be completely in love. I told you, she loves Julian. You were just a band-aid for her broken heart. If you had any self-respect, you would have walked away years ago. How can you be so shameless, clinging to her like a parasite? I needed to pack and had zero time for this childish drama. I tried to walk away, but the crowd blocked me, mocking the ugly duckling who thought he could be a swan. Keep dreaming. If Julian had stayed, do you honestly think trash like you would have ever married a sterling? Go look in a mirror. If you are smart, you will sign those divorce papers and get out of this house. The insults turned into physical shoves. What? Are you mute? We are talking to you. Did you hear us? When I did not reply, one hot-headed rich kid lost his mind and slammed his hands into my chest. A deafening crash of shattered glass echoed violently across the entire ballroom. I flew backward, smashing straight through a massive, multi-tiered champagne tower. Glass exploded in every direction. Pale champagne mixed with my dark blood on the floor. Instantly, the music died and the room went completely silent. Up on the stage, Serafina saw everything. Her pupils shrank in absolute shock. She dropped Julian's hand and sprinted toward me. Seeing me bleeding among the broken glass, her eyes flashed with pure, volcanic rage. She knelt beside me, pulling me up as she screamed for someone to call the doctor. She glared at the crowd, her voice cold enough to freeze hell as she asked who did this. Nobody dared to take a breath. The look on her face was downright lethal. She was about to snap when a bodyguard rushed over, pleading with CEO Sterling to check on Julian because his stomach hurt. Serafina held onto me tight, her brow furrowing. Is it serious? The guard looked completely panicked. He says Julian is rolling on the floor in agony. For the first time, Serafina hesitated, glancing down at me with pure indecision. I knew exactly what she wanted to say. My face remained completely, flawlessly blank. I get it. He's been spoiled since he was a kid. One tiny scratch makes him whine all day, and you are just used to babying him. Serafina stood there in shock. I had just stolen her exact excuse. Her mouth opened, but she could not find any words. Ignoring the pain, I forced myself up and spoke calmly. It is fine. Just go to him. Send the doctor his way first. I will handle this alone. For some reason, seeing me so completely detached made a sudden panic claw at her chest. Of course, I used to be easygoing, but today, I was badly hurt. My willingness to understand her went completely off the charts. I was so detached that she did not even register to me anymore. This was not like me. Before, my whole world revolved around her. Exactly when did I change like this? Serafina opened her mouth to speak, but Julian's dramatic cries echoed from far away. Her hesitation evaporated. She threw me one last guilty glance. Caspian, I will come find you later. I will make this up to you. Without wasting another second, she let go of me and ran. I watched her run to comfort Julian, whispering sweet things as they disappeared. A highly sarcastic smirk crept onto my face. To Beatrix and her friends, my reaction was just a pathetic defense mechanism. She laughed, asking if I seriously thought a stunt like this would make her sister care. She still abandoned you anyway. Caspian, if you have any dignity left, pack up your things and walk away from the Sterling family yourself. I paid them absolutely no attention. After finding an empty guest room, I patched up my own wounds, threw on clean clothes, and hobbled away. Once back at the mansion, I went straight upstairs and packed my belongings. Lugging the suitcase downstairs, I dropped the signed divorce papers right onto the coffee table. Right when I opened the front door to walk out, I collided with someone trying to enter. Beatrix saw me and instantly started yelling. Where the hell did I think I was going? My sister made me bring you this medicine. Honestly, I have no idea what is wrong with her head. Rather than comforting Julian, she was stressing over you and made me run this errand. I have been searching forever. I told her I did not want it. Keep it for your beloved Julian, I muttered with complete indifference, gently shoving her hand aside to step out. That was when Beatrix finally noticed the massive suitcase in my hand. Her expression shifted instantly, and she seized my arm. She demanded to know what I was doing. I stared back, my eyes totally blank. Obviously, I am holding a suitcase. What does it look like? I am walking away. Your sister is in love with Julian, and you have begged for him to join the family for years. I am willingly getting a divorce and stepping aside to hand him my place. Listening to this, Beatrix stared in absolute disbelief, her entire body locking up as if she had been tasered. She could not process what she was hearing. After all, my intense, desperate obsession with Serafina was legendary among their friends. How could I just pack up and walk away like this? Suddenly, she decided she knew what was really happening, though her voice shook. Caspian, stop pretending. You are obsessed with my sister. You literally crawled on your knees just to marry her. Why would you ever ask for a divorce? Oh, I see. You were just playing games. Well, let me tell you, that stunt will not work on her. I stared back at her, completely unbothered. If you do not believe me, go check the coffee table. The signed paperwork is right there. Beatrix, you are holding my arm awfully tight. Do not tell me you are actually going to miss me. That made her instantly blow up, pulling her hand away like she had been burned. In your dreams, I wish you had packed up years ago. Once you are gone, I am going to launch fireworks to celebrate. When my sister hears you walked away on your own, she is going to be thrilled. Yet, even to her own ears, those words sounded completely hollow. Without even looking back at her, I threw out a casual, well, congratulations then. You finally got exactly what you wanted. Then, I stepped through the door, walking away without a single ounce of hesitation. For the very first time, Beatrix realized that something had shattered beyond repair. A sudden dread gripped her, and she screamed down the driveway, Caspian, where are you even going? Are you not going to tell my sister? My grip paused briefly on the suitcase handle. I looked back at Beatrix, then past her at the massive, cold mansion. To repay a past debt, I had pretended to be desperately in love with Serafina. For 5 years, I was the punchline of their jokes, just a pathetic loser who refused to let go of her. To settle that debt, I threw my dreams away, threw away my own future, and completely lost my identity. During those 5 long years, I worked myself to the bone to be the perfect husband, only to get zero respect. I endured that soul-crushing existence for 5 whole years. But now, the debt was paid. Finally, I was a free man. I smiled then, a truly genuine, utterly free smile. This life, it was going to be mine, and only mine. From this moment on, none of this had anything to do with me. Serafina, I hoped I'd never see her face again. With a freeing wave, I slipped into the vast night under the moonlight, my suitcase, my only companion. It took 3 days before Serafina finally came home, just to grab a fresh set of clothes. Walking in, she called my name out of habit, but after a few shouts, only a couple of maids shuffled over. Where was her husband? She frowned, watching the maids fumbling to help her with her shoes and coat. The maids stammered for a full minute, finally whispering that Sir hadn't been home. She slipped on her slippers and walked in, not home again. This time, she had walked Julian away, graciously telling me I could just walk myself to the hospital. And now, in her eyes, I was just throwing another childish tantrum and running away from home. The mild irritation in her chest slowly twisted into a sudden, boiling rage. Serafina walked over to the sofa and immediately noticed a document on the coffee table. Usually, she would not even look at it. But today, drawn by some strange urge, she picked it up. A divorce agreement. Those heavy words burned into her eyes. Right there at the bottom, under the female party signature line, her own handwriting stared back at her. Instantly, all the warmth drained from her face. The light in her eyes died, leaving behind nothing but a cold, pitch-black emptiness. She reached down and slowly ran her finger over the signature. It was not printed. It was not forged. It was absolutely, genuinely her own. But searching her memory, she had no recollection of ever signing a divorce paper. Suddenly, her eyes went wide. She remembered that morning they had breakfast together. I had slid a paper across the table for her to sign, but she was too busy texting Julian to even look at it. That was the divorce agreement. Realizing this, she squeezed the paper, crushing it tightly in her fist. Then she savagely tore it into tiny pieces, throwing them in the air like a sick celebration. Divorce? This was the absolute joke of the century. The man loved her so much he would literally leap into the ocean for her. She had abandoned him so many times, yet he never got genuinely mad. He was obviously just throwing a jealous fit because she had been with Julian lately. They had a 5-year marriage. It was completely normal for him to get a little jealous. Besides, he would crawl back to her eventually on his own. And if he did not, he would definitely come back. Serafina was completely sure of it because in this world, nobody else loved her with that kind of desperate intensity. Over the next few days, the maids in the mansion made a silent pact to never speak my name. But then, Serafina brought Julian home from the hospital and sat down to some incredibly tasteless porridge. Beatrix slammed her spoon onto the table. Who cooked this garbage? Where is Caspian? Get him to make us a new batch. A nearby maid hesitated before speaking up. Miss, the master has not been home in days. Beatrix's eyes immediately went wide. He was really gone. She had assumed all my talk about divorce was just a bluff. After all, her family was the ultimate golden ticket for a guy like me. Anyone with a brain would cling to that wealth desperately. Remembering those divorce papers she had spotted on the table earlier, she glanced up at Serafina across from her. The maids whispered that Serafina had seen the documents as well, but just shrugged them off and tore them directly into the trash. Beatrix bit her lip, looking over at Julian. He was silently eating his food, pretending he could not hear a single thing they said. Her sister had been obsessed with Julian for years, and now, he seemed to be signaling a comeback. I had finally divorced her and walked out of their lives. Logically, her sister should be celebrating. Beatrix turned her gaze back to Serafina. Her sister was scowling, clearly irritated by my long absence. Just thinking about me filled Beatrix with anger. Why can't you just stay gone? Why do you have to keep haunting my sister like this? After dinner, the maids helped Julian upstairs to rest. Beatrix looked at Serafina, who was still lingering at the table. After a quiet moment, she asked, Sister, when are you going to make things official with Julian? I have been waiting for him to be my brother-in-law for years. Serafina's head instantly snapped up, glaring right at her. What did you just say? Beatrix had always been somewhat afraid of her sister. She cringed back, but stubbornly stood her ground. I know Caspian divorced you. You do not even care about him, so why not be with Julian? How do you know he divorced me? Beatrix swallowed hard. When you had me take him medicine the other day, I saw those papers. Serafina initially figured I was only throwing a tantrum to get her attention, but with me gone this long, she had to face the cold truth. I was dead serious about the divorce and it filled her with pure, burning outrage. I used to love her to the point of absolute madness. How could I just walk away? Suddenly, her phone rang. When she picked up, Mrs. Sterling's frail voice came through, asking her to come back to the estate. Her mother had news. Looking at her daughter, Mrs. Sterling took a deep breath. She suggested Serafina and Julian get together now that Caspian was gone, but Serafina snapped that she never agreed to a divorce. Her mother gasped in absolute shock. Reaching into a drawer, she pulled out a little green booklet, the official divorce certificate. But the split is finalized. Didn't Caspian even tell you? Seeing the genuine confusion wash over Serafina's face, Mrs. Sterling grew even more bewildered. She assumed Caspian just skipped telling Serafina he was moving abroad. She never guessed he had kept the actual divorce a total secret. How on earth did they sign? Serafina stared at the divorce certificate, her eyes turning cold and dark. A furious anger burned deep in her chest. She had assumed I only tricked her into signing a basic separation agreement. She never imagined I had actually completed the legal divorce. Getting that certificate required a 1-month cooling-off period. That meant I had been planning to leave her for over a month. Noticing her mother's confusion, she brushed it off with a few quick, vague excuses. Then she demanded to know why her mother was suddenly playing matchmaker with Julian. Mrs. Sterling gave a bitter smile. She reminded her daughter that she once threatened suicide over Julian. Now that he was back and they were both single, things had changed. People were saying they were perfect for each other. Intense nausea surged through Serafina. She kept telling herself that she never actually agreed to leave Caspian. Knowing the split was final made her panic. During their 5 years of marriage, she had grown completely addicted to my constant care. If they were truly divorced, she knew her entire life would become a complete disaster. Besides, I loved her more than life. This divorce had to be a stunt. Sure, she still had feelings for Julian. He was her childhood dream, the one she spent years obsessing over. But completely letting go of me? She suddenly realized she couldn't do it. Sensing her daughter's inner turmoil, Mrs. Sterling slid another document out of the drawer. When Serafina spotted the bold title, Debt Repayment Contract, and my signature at the bottom, her eyes nearly popped out. She demanded to know what it was. Since it was her daughter, Mrs. Sterling finally decided to reveal the truth. When Julian married and moved away, Serafina went from a brilliant golden girl to a depressed mess. So, her mother wanted someone to pull her out of that dark place. and Caspian happened to show up to express his gratitude for their sponsorship. The two of them talked and quickly struck a deal. If I stayed by Serafina's side for 5 years to heal her broken heart, my massive debt to the family would be paid off. To be honest, Mrs. Sterling admitted that I had done an absolutely incredible job over those 5 years. But I always remembered my boundaries, constantly showing respect by calling her Mrs. Sterling. Originally, Mrs. Sterling planned to treat me like a real son-in-law if Julian never came back. But the very moment that 5-year contract ended, Julian flew back, and her daughter actually crashed her car just to see him. Mrs. Sterling was still struggling with how to bring it up when I beat her to the punch, filing for divorce and walking away. During her mother's entire explanation, Serafina heard absolutely nothing. Clenching the debt contract in a trembling, white-knuckled grip, her mind went totally blank. What did she just hear? For the last 5 years, every single act of kindness was just a way to settle a debt. I had never actually loved her. That was why I rushed to divorce her the moment Julian returned. Yet, she wondered, was the devotion in my eyes really just an act? If there was no love, why would I leap into the freezing ocean to save her? Why treat her like royalty for 5 years with that soft, aching look? She stared at the contract. It detailed every single action I was obligated to perform during our 5 years. The further down her eyes traveled, the more color drained from her face. From major things like protecting her very life, to tiny details like running the household, every single gesture of affection was legally dictated by a piece of paper. There was not one shred of real feeling in it. The dense legal terms completely shattered the very last of Serafina's desperate delusions. She glared, a sudden wave of pure fury and resentment burning in her eyes. It nearly destroyed her. Instantly, she shredded the contract into confetti in her hands. To Mrs. Sterling, her daughter was always a master of self-control. She only lost her mind once before. Julian's wedding was the second time she lost control over a man. Her mother swallowed whatever she wanted to say. Serafina dragged in deep breaths, forcing herself to quiet the rage. Since I had signed that contract with her mom, she knew her mother had to know my location. Serafina looked up with desperate hope. "Mom, you know where Caspian went, right?" Mrs. Sterling just stared back, silent for a long moment. Of course she knew, since she arranged my flights and study abroad plans. But I had begged her to keep my secret, leaving her torn as she faced her daughter. "I am sorry, I cannot tell you. And even if I did, Mrs. Sterling added with a hollow laugh, it would not matter anyway. Maybe I had expected this. I figured she would eventually break as a parent and tell Serafina everything. Because of that, I never even boarded the flight to the country she booked." Instantly, Serafina's hopeful eyes shattered into pure grief. She never thought I would disappear so completely, so cold-bloodedly. I had crashed into her world like a storm, and now I was gone without a trace. Her mother only offered a quiet, pitying sigh. She softly asked about Julian, but then, a sharp ringtone pierced the air. Answering it, Beatrix's frantic voice screamed that something terrible had happened to Julian, begging her to hurry. When she arrived, a group of strangers stood outside the mansion doors. An icy, elegant woman stood over Julian, staring down her nose as he sobbed with his face buried in his hands. Serafina recognized her instantly. It was Julian's ex-wife, Octavia. Seeing her arrive, Beatrix waved frantically, screaming for her sister to hurry. The entire crowd spun around to look, including Julian's sharp-eyed ex-wife. She gave Serafina a slow, critical scan from head to toe. That cold glare made Serafina's heart suddenly stutter with dread. Serafina shielded Julian, demanding to know what business Octavia had at the Sterling family residence. Octavia sneered, asking what she was doing there and saying she should know best. "Julian and I were married for 5 years, and you harassed him the entire time. Frankly, this divorce is entirely on your hands." Serafina was utterly stunned. Sure, she had flown across the ocean to watch Julian every single week for 5 years, but she was always careful to leave ordinary gifts. Octavia glared at her like trash, though she and Julian had a hasty marriage. She initially intended to truly love him, but taking over her family's massive business empire left her drowning in work, leading to neglect. Watching his passive-aggressive online posts, wishing she could explain, but urgent corporate calls kept getting in the way. Around that time, weird foreign gifts started showing up out of nowhere near Julian. Pulling up the security footage, she saw Serafina acting like a stalker, dropping gifts at their door. Pure fury exploded in her chest. She slammed those presents in Julian's face, triggering endless screaming fights. Finally, Julian divorced her in secret and fled back home. Octavia glared cold steel at the woman before her. "You really have stellar morals, Mrs. Sterling, keeping your own husband at home while obsessing over someone else's." Those words drained every bit of color from her face. "I am already divorced." Behind her, Julian snapped his head up to stare, absolute shock in his eyes. He always knew she had a massive crush on him growing up, but he only ever saw her as a sibling. When a friend warned him she was planning to confess that very night, he was actually busy preparing to bring his own girlfriend home to meet his family. To escape that horror, he rushed into a marriage with Octavia and fled. Even though they rushed into it, Octavia truly did love him in the beginning. But her booming career, other guys flirting, and her late excuses quickly caused cracks to fracture their bond. Meanwhile, Serafina kept stalking his profiles, which explained those weird doorstep packages. Knowing Serafina was married, he realized how much destruction her gifts would trigger for everyone. So, he desperately tried to trash them in secret. But the exact day he went to throw them out, Octavia caught him red-handed. The mounting pressure finally exploded. Not long after, he secretly got a divorce and ran back home. But his parents were living overseas and couldn't protect him. Right when he tried checking into his family's hotel, Serafina caught wind of the split and came hunting for him like a predator. He was a coward at heart. Honestly, the single bravest thing he had ever managed was secretly ending his marriage with Octavia. Standing before Serafina, a woman whose love had always been terrifyingly aggressive, he turned her down flat, claiming he already had a place. But she ignored him completely, acting totally deaf while dragging him back to the Sterling estate. Seeing how annoyed I looked about the situation, he was secretly celebrating on the inside, praying my irritation was his ticket to escape. Who knew I would actually say yes? Once his own place was remodeled, he slipped away while she was gone. They had been childhood friends for years, and he genuinely did not want to completely destroy that bond. Yet every single time he pushed her away, her mind warped it into some twisted, romantic signal. The whole thing was a living nightmare, and when he learned I had divorced her and walked away, his guilt absolutely crushed him. He should have never returned to this place. Suddenly, Octavia ignored Serafina entirely, stepping right past her to grab Julian. "Julian, let's go." Serafina lunged to grab him back, but Octavia's security team instantly stepped in, forming an impenetrable human wall. "Julian, I'm so sorry for everything," Serafina pleaded, desperately apologizing and promising that none of it would ever happen again. "Are you really leaving with her?" "Regarding our divorce agreement, I have already filed the paperwork to cancel it." Julian looked completely paralyzed by indecision. Serafina begged him not to say yes, panic splashing across her face. She knew the sheer scale of the psychological trauma Octavia had inflicted on him. Going back now would surely mean restarting that entire horrific nightmare. Beatrix nodded frantically right beside her, shouting that her sister was the absolute best match for him. Julian looked down at his arm, locked in Octavia's grip. Taking a deep breath, he looked straight at Serafina. "Thank you for looking after me all this time." Just like that, the woman in front of him completely shattered. Julian bit his lip. "Ever since we were kids, I was a total pushover who could never say no, and you always had to rescue me. I am incredibly thankful for that, and I finally found the strength to say no, but whenever I stand my ground, I end up tearing up out of pure fear. Somehow, you always twisted my tears into a completely different meaning, creating all this painful confusion. I really am sorry. Caspian is a wonderful person, please let him know I apologize to him, too. Serafina, let us never cross paths again. Honestly, I have no clue how that tragic soap opera finally wrapped up." As the crowd slowly drifted away, only Serafina remained, standing entirely alone in the empty courtyard. Seeing her daughter wither away like a hollow shell again, Mrs. Sterling felt furious yet deeply broken. Every rejection reduced her to this miserable state. This spiral was absolutely killing her. Only this time, there was no Caspian left to jump in front of the bullets and save her. These rapid-fire crises completely broke her spirit. Across the vast ocean in Italy, local netizens were eagerly sharing every single detail of this messy drama. Leaving the art studio one afternoon, my buddy thrust his phone right at me, eager to show me the latest drama. "Caspian, check this out." Adjusting the painting in my arms, I glanced briefly at the screen and muttered a simple "oh." My friend stared back, completely dumbfounded by my reaction. Shrugging my shoulders, I asked what he expected me to say. After all, the elite social circle was incredibly small. Everybody already knew my history. The massive scandal of Serafina crashing her car for romance and then marrying a different guy had dominated the local news. They also knew about the desperate, wild stunts I had pulled back then. But their take on things was totally different from Serafina's snobbish inner circle. "You are such a catch, yet she never appreciated you. Instead, she is out chasing someone else's husband. It is completely shameless." My buddy threw his hands up in sheer disbelief and anger, declaring that if he were me, he would have slapped her. I just laughed. The moment I boarded that plane, I washed my hands of all that chaos. Late that night, while finishing up a canvas, a loud ringtone cut through the quiet. It was an old classmate who had recently returned back home. Right when I answered, his incredibly hyper voice practically blew out my speaker. "Caspian, you will not believe this, but Serafina has lost her mind." "Crazy?" I frowned. That was when I heard the news after our split, my exit, and her dream guy returning to America with his ex. Serafina completely broke down. She was spending every waking hour shut inside, drinking herself into a stupor. In the past, I would have rushed over with homemade hangover soup. Without my constant concierge service, she suddenly, almost miraculously, began to appreciate every little thing I used to do for her. As people kept reminding her how good I was, her drive to find me grew obsessive. Too bad for her. I never actually set foot in the country Mrs. Sterling picked out. She had absolutely no idea where I went. Losing her mind, trying to track me down, she totally neglected her company. She went on this wild tear, hunting down and destroying every single person who used to torment me. She even packed her precious sister Beatrix off to Australia, the same sister who always hated my guts. With all these unhinged stunts, if she wasn't flat out crazy, what was she? I stared down, mindlessly twirling a rose on the windowsill. Honestly, the second I started paying off that debt, Serafina became nothing more than a highly irritating side quest. My entire focus was just speedrunning the job and getting the hell away from her. When I first took off, I was going to use the ticket Mrs. Sterling bought, but I had a change of heart. The second the plane touched down, I grabbed a connecting flight straight to Italy. From that moment on, I poured my entire soul into my career, never wasting another second thinking about Serafina's drama. Hearing about her now, only one thought crossed my mind. Too little, too late, her regret is cheaper than dirt. Besides, I didn't love her anymore. Why should I care about her pathetic regrets? I grabbed my sketchbook and headed to the studio like any other day. When I walked out, my classmate Lou was waiting by the door. I took some warm bread from his hands and passed him the birthday gift I'd made. We were laughing and catching up on our walk, only to find out all classes were canceled. Word was, some legendary powerhouse from the art world was stopping by to give a guest lecture. Lou and I grabbed our gear and rushed over to the university. The lecture hall was already absolutely packed. Lou and I practically had to fight a gladiator battle just to snag 2 seats in the very back. When a knock rattled the door, the room went quiet. The second the guest speaker stepped inside, the entire crowd fell absolutely dead silent. No wonder, really. The guy was just ridiculously good looking. People in the art world see gorgeous faces all the time, but nobody compared to the man standing at that podium. But when I got a clear look at his face, my breath caught. I actually knew him. It had been years. He looked right at me with a warm, knowing smile, and suddenly my eyes welled up with tears. It was Orion, my childhood best friend who grew up right alongside me in the very same orphanage. Seeing him up there on stage, a certified legend, was surreal. The classmate who walked with me earlier had no idea that this famous guest speaker was my long-lost brother. My classmate Lou was just a friendly peer, but the man on stage was family. Yes, this legendary artist standing before the entire crowd was my oldest friend in the world. He and Genevieve were a bit older than me, always keeping me safe back then, but our paths split. They both ended up being adopted by wonderful families, while I stayed behind alone, until the Sterlings finally sponsored me. Scanning my fragile, skinny frame, Orion's eyes filled with pain. Back when they protected me, I was just a happy, chubby kid. But life had other plans. We were way too young to stay connected after they left, and we completely lost touch. He spent years searching for us, though he only managed to track down Genevieve at first. He didn't even know I married Serafina until he saw the Sterlings' official wedding announcement. He dug into everything she put me through, and learning about all that garbage broke his heart. I was once so bright and cheerful, now scarred inside from years of surviving a toxic marriage. The moment they realized I'd escaped to Italy to study, they packed their bags and moved to Rome. Sitting down with him, I found out he and Genevieve had actually tied the knot. Hearing that, I completely broke. Every bit of pain I'd bottled up for years came pouring out. I sobbed like a child. That night, we celebrated. Seeing Genevieve in person set me off all over again. We spent hours talking, catching up on everything. Genevieve kept piling my favorite foods onto my plate, asking gently what I planned to do next. I chewed my last bite of steak and slowly shook my head. Nothing is set in stone yet. Honestly, I just want to finish my degree, set up my own art exhibition, and find work I actually love. But returning home made me hesitate. I still need to go back eventually to see the director of our old orphanage. She was the one who quietly slipped a wad of cash into my bag on the day I left. But going back meant a massive risk of running into Serafina. Just thinking about all the psychotic stunts she pulled made me frown. Orion and Genevieve quickly changed the subject, telling me to just enjoy the food and worry about tomorrow later. No matter what, they had my back. Autumn rolled around in a flash, and my big day finally arrived. Standing there, a wave of pure emotion hit me. The graduation ceremony that had been delayed for 5 long years was finally happening. Happy graduation, Caspian. My friends showered me with flowers and endless blessings. At our farewell dinner, I let loose and drank way too much wine. The bitter alcohol burned my throat, but my heart was dealing with a different, sour kind of ache. We laughed and cried, knowing how hard it would be to meet up again. We partied straight through the night. A week later, I packed my bags, said goodbye to Italy, and followed Orion and Genevieve back to our home country. It was only a temporary trip, meant mainly to visit the orphanage director. Second, I had promised to co-host an art gallery show with Orion. Seeing the director after 2 years made me tear up instantly. She held my hands tightly. When she heard I finished my studies and chased down my dream, she practically beamed with pride. Chatting together, the director suddenly remembered something. Oh, by the way, shortly after you left the country, Serafina came by looking for you. Hearing that name after all this time made my brain freeze. Seeing how desperate she looked, she knew you must have been treated terribly. So she didn't tell her a single thing. After dinner, I went back to the Sterling mansion. No, Orion's mansion. Because it was only a brief visit, they absolutely insisted I crash at their place. The second I walked in, Genevieve rushed over, fussing like crazy and dragging me to the dining room for some healthy soup. After finalizing the exhibition details, I finally went to my room to rest. Meanwhile, over at the Sterling headquarters, Serafina stared blankly at the photo on her desk, completely zoned out. 2 years. 2 whole years now. Every single resource at her disposal had been deployed, yet there wasn't a single trace of me anywhere. Looking at my young, naive face in the photo, a bitter smile touched her lips. It was our wedding photo, the only picture of us together from our 5 years of marriage. Funny how people only appreciate what they had once it's gone forever. She finally got it. When I first left, she thought she was just going through butler withdrawal. It wasn't until she saw that debt repayment contract and lived through the endless disasters afterward that she realized her reliance on me had actually turned into real love a long time ago. She had just been totally blinded to it because Julian was always in the picture. By the time she finally admitted her feelings, I had already completely erased myself from her life. Suddenly, a soft knock on her office door pulled her back. Her assistant walked in to let her know she was invited to a new art exhibition downtown tomorrow. Only after our divorce did Serafina realize just how little she actually knew about me. Like when I returned from sketching in the mountains, she assumed I had just picked up some random new hobby. She had no idea I was a childhood art prodigy. If I hadn't been working to pay off her family's debt, I would have been a massive star in the art world years ago. Maybe she just wanted to feel closer. Whatever the reason, she started showing up at every local art exhibition. Meanwhile, my classmate sent me the guest list of VIPs and media invited to our upcoming show, just to give me a heads up. But when my eyes hit Serafina's name on that paper, my heart stopped for a second. Seeing my reaction, my classmate quickly chimed in, telling me that if I didn't want to see her, I could skip the press interviews. I just smiled, shook my head, and said it was fine. From the very day I landed back home, I knew our paths would eventually cross. As the saying goes, you can hide on the 1st, but not on the 15th. Besides, what was there to be afraid of? My debt to her family was fully paid with interest. We were just strangers now. On exhibition day, a massive crowd packed the gallery. Serafina walked among them, following the guides. Spending the last 2 years visiting countless galleries had actually given her a pretty decent eye for art. Every painting looked incredible, until she froze completely in front of one particular frame. No chaotic lines, just pure emotion. The plaque next to it read the title, Freedom. For some strange reason, she immediately thought of me. 5 years of marriage, endlessly orbiting her. Waiting at home 24/7, losing my identity, possessing zero freedom. Normal for others, but an impossible luxury for me. As she stood there, completely dazed, a deeply familiar voice drifted into her ears. She snapped her head around, instantly locking eyes with the man she had been obsessively dreaming about. In that split second, her entire world went dead silent. Her mind and eyes were exclusively filled by the man standing just feet away. Right then, I was explaining my art. Then, someone called my name. I frowned. Before I could even turn around, someone crashed into me from behind, locking me in a desperate embrace. Suddenly, an overwhelmingly sweet perfume hit my nose. Serafina locked me in a desperate embrace, her entire body shaking. Caspian, you are finally home. I was just getting ready to forcefully push her away, but another figure moved much faster. Orion violently pulled the woman off me. Caspian, are you okay? I shook my head while Orion glared back at her with icy eyes. Serafina, do you have no shame at all? How dare you even show your face to Caspian? Every time he looked at her, Orion remembered the terrible abuse I put up with for 5 years, making his blood boil. Serafina opened her mouth, trying desperately to explain herself, but I stepped in to hold Orion back. Brother, let us talk somewhere else. I refused to let this woman ruin the grand exhibition we had poured our entire lives into. Upstairs at the second-floor cafe, Orion stood like a shield in front of me and Genevieve, confronting Serafina. Caspian divorced you ages ago, so why the hell are you still harassing him? Serafina peered past Orion, staring straight at my face. I looked back with such coldness it felt like an invisible hand was squeezing her heart, stealing her breath. Never before had I looked at her with such icy, flat indifference. The moment she saw me again, A million questions flooded her mind. Yet, in the end, only one choked sentence managed to force its way out of her throat. "Why did you divorce me, Caspian?" Genevieve rolled her eyes so hard, she almost saw her own brain. What kind of brain-dead question was that? I just stared back, my expression completely blank. The contract was up, so naturally, it was time to go. Ever since she saw those signed divorce papers, I knew the truth about our debt agreement would eventually come out. So, for all 5 of those years, everything was just to pay off a debt? Serafina squeezed her hands together, her voice shaking violently. I answered with a simple yes. I stayed completely unfazed. Then, as if remembering something, I added a quiet afterthought. From the exact second your mother forced me to sign that contract, our marriage was purely transactional. I constantly reminded myself of that. That is why, right after signing the marriage papers, I drafted our divorce agreement. To be honest, Serafina was technically my first woman. Fresh out of college and thrown into marriage, I was terrified my naive heart would get swept up in a 6-year illusion. So, I kept those divorce papers close by as a constant reality check. Whenever I felt even the slightest hint of catching real feelings for her, I would pull out that paper to remind myself of our cold business transaction and the massive class divide separating us. Did I ever try to truly love Serafina? Maybe a little, but every time my heart started to flutter, she would brutally cast me aside for Julian. Any normal person would suffer total emotional burnout from that, especially someone like me, who was only there to work off a debt. Honestly, the fact that I did not actively hate her was a miracle. 5 years. It sounds like a long time, easily long enough to make me feel doomed to perpetual misery. Yet it also felt incredibly short, because in one single split second, I broke free and left the country behind. My cold, harsh words hit her like physical blows. Serafina's face instantly lost all color, turning a terrifying shade of paper white. Serafina, I never did, not in the past, not now, and certainly not in the future. I have never loved you, and never will. We were just a transaction. I did not give a single thought to how she would react to that. I just wanted to wrap up this conversation quickly and get back to running my art exhibition. Serafina tried to lunge forward and grab me, but Orion blocked her path like a solid brick wall. All she could do was watch helplessly as I walked out. Thankfully, this little bit of drama did not ruin the exhibition. The show ended up being a massive success, so Orion and Genevieve booked a celebratory table at my favorite spot. But before the food even arrived, a huge, bright bouquet of deep red roses was delivered straight to our table. The waiter asked which of us was Caspian, explaining it was a congratulatory gift from Miss Sterling for the successful show. I did not even lay a hand on it, telling the waiter to take them back to her. Tell Miss Sterling I absolutely despise red roses. Those were Julian's favorite, anyway. I only like wild, thorny ones. The once cozy room instantly froze. The waiter stood there awkwardly clutching the massive bouquet, totally unsure what to do. Realizing I was not going to say anything else, he quietly slipped away. But that did not stop Serafina. She stubbornly sent wild roses to my studio every single day. And every single day, before they even got inside, those flowers went straight into the trash. At another art event, Serafina cornered me. She desperately wanted to know why I kept refusing to accept her flowers. I stared at her for a long time, then let out a sharp, bitter laugh. We were married for 5 whole years, and you still do not know the first thing about me. Since I do not like you, I despise every single thing you send my way. Serafina, why could we not just part ways peacefully? I divorced you, shouldn't you be the happiest person alive? She gasped, her teary eyes reflecting the dim light, her voice shaking. She reached out, trying to grab my hand. No, Caspian, divorcing you did not make me happy. I am so used to having you around. It was only after you left that I realized I love you, Julian. My feelings for Julian were just a stupid childhood obsession. He is gone now. So why can we not go back to how things were? Go back. A wave of total disbelief washed over me. Every single day of our marriage was an absolute psychological torture chamber for me. I had zero desire to return to that hell. I dodged her reaching hand, my voice freezing completely. Serafina, listen to your own nonsense. You were just used to having me around, like some convenient, live-in butler, except no other butler would jump into the ocean for you. Do you honestly think you love me? Listen to the nonsense coming out of your mouth. Do you even believe yourself? Her face drained of color. Since entering high society at 18, she had never faced such a brutally soul-crushing moment. She was always so arrogant, looking down on everyone from her high pedestal. The only reason she looked so terrified was because I refused to follow her script, ruthlessly popping her delusional bubble. I did not give her another glance. I just turned and walked away. But as soon as I stepped outside, my phone rang. Mrs. Sterling. Thinking of her always brought up a complicated wave of gratitude. After all, she was the one who gave me a chance to clear my debt. Way back in college, I was completely broke after paying tuition. I refused to remain indebted to her family forever. Trading 5 years of my life to wipe that financial slate clean seemed like the only real option. Out of basic human respect, I visited her. Orion watched me with deep concern. You and that family are completely even. Why walk back into the lion's den? What if they try to trap you again? Orion's adoptive family had shown him the dark, scheming reality of the wealthy elite. He told me the brutal truth. Repaying a debt was just a beautiful excuse to force a young guy to act as emotional rehab for a spoiled heiress. He was absolutely right. It was completely sickening. Mrs. Sterling made some fake, polite small talk before smoothly steering the conversation back to Serafina. Without any subtlety, she demanded I give her daughter another chance. Orion was absolutely spot on. Serafina's emotional trauma was entirely her own fault. Yet they dragged me, an innocent bystander, right into their toxic mess. My education was ruined, proudly labeled as debt repayment. After 6 years of absolute torment, I was still expected to get on my knees and thank them. Where in the universe does a ridiculous scam like that even exist? Honestly, I never wanted to do this initially. If they had just let me finish college and study abroad, I could have easily paid back the money with full interest in a couple of years. But Mrs. Sterling pampered her daughter too much. She could not stand to see her suffer for a second, so she dragged me down into the mud to be a stepping stone. Her precious daughter's life could not be ruined by a simple heartbreak. But my own life and dreams? Nobody gave a damn. Mrs. Sterling stared at the successful man sitting across from her with a mix of extreme satisfaction and deep regret. Satisfied because I would make a perfect son-in-law. Regretful because her foolish daughter had been so obsessed with Julian that she fumbled this catch. But now that Julian was finally out of the picture, if they could guilt-trip me into running back, it would be a massive win for them. Listening to Mrs. Sterling's manipulative speech, I said absolutely nothing. I just pulled out a bank card I had prepared beforehand and set it on the table. The money inside is double the amount your family ever invested in my education. Without that insane contract, it would have only taken me 2 years of working to pay them back with full interest. The Sterling family loved playing the generous philanthropist, automatically wiring money to plenty of other kids. Yet, they never hunted down those other children, demanding they sacrifice their lives to pay them back. I was just too naive, practically walking right into their trap. My mind was finally clear. I saw the truth of it all, but I just lacked the strength to chase revenge. Ignoring Mrs. Sterling's shocked expression, I dropped the card and walked out. She stood frozen. Then, a wave of pure fury consumed her. But remembering that Orion's powerful family heavily backed me, she forcefully swallowed her rage. Stepping outside the Sterling gates, I bumped straight into Serafina. She gasped, asking Caspian why he was here. Her voice carried a mix of shock and desperate hope. I just barked out a bitter laugh, telling her Mrs. Sterling wanted me to repeat what happened 7 years ago, throwing away my career and future, shackling myself to you and wasting my entire youth. The color instantly drained from Serafina's face. She remembered the contract terms she saw 2 years ago. During those 5 years of repayment, I had to drop everything and dedicate 100% of my life to serving her. Anyone would lose their mind after a year or two, let alone surviving like that for 5 whole years. On top of that was the brutal way she treated me. She could not even imagine how miserable my life had been. A sharp, physical ache pierced her chest. She clenched her fists, whispering that she was so sorry, but I had lost the patience for her apologies a lifetime ago. Without giving her a single glance, I brushed right past her and walked away. Maybe my words were just too brutal. Serafina did not bother me for the next few days. I gladly enjoyed the quiet peace, right up until Orion's family banquet. Being Orion's brother, I was on the VIP list. A sharp, loud screech suddenly erupted behind me. Someone screamed, "What are you doing here?" I turned to see Mrs. Sterling's daughter, Beatrix, charging at me like a rabid bull. Mrs. Sterling could not stand her daughter's suffering, begging Mr. Sterling to secretly bring her home. Spotting me, Beatrix flared with rage, screaming that it was all my fault. "You divorced her, and because of you, my sister sent me to Australia for 2 whole years." Right behind me stood a giant champagne tower. I tried to dodge out of instinct, but my foot slipped on the steps. Genevieve reacted with lightning speed, calling my name as she pulled me back. Beatrix lost control, crashing headfirst into the massive champagne tower. Crash! A massive shatter echoed through the room as every single guest whipped their heads toward the noise. Beatrix lay buried in shattered glass, covered in bleeding cuts and soaked in booze. Hearing the chaos, Serafina rushed over to pull Beatrix to her feet. But the moment Serafina touched her, Beatrix wailed in agony. Meanwhile, Genevieve carefully checked me over. Once she was sure I was completely unharmed, she turned a freezing look at the crying heap. The Sterling family really has great manners, charging at Caspian like wild boars for no reason. Did he even breathe your way? If my memory serves me right, 2 years ago, it was also Miss Sterling and her cruel friends who shoved Caspian into a champagne tower. Hearing those words, Serafina's reaching hand froze in midair. She stared at me standing safely behind Genevieve, her expression filled with absolute conflict. I smirked at the absolute mess on the ground. Under the heavy whispers and judging stares of the elite crowd, Beatrix flushed deep red. Ignoring everyone, she pointed a shaking finger. "It's all your fault. If not for you, I would never have been sent away to Australia. With her wealth, she should have lived like royalty over there." But Serafina was dead set on teaching her a lesson, completely freezing all her credit cards. Every month, she had to live off tiny allowances that Mrs. Sterling secretly sent her. It was a humiliating life. "My fault?" I asked coldly. "Who looked down on me and mocked me constantly? And who actually ordered your exile to Australia anyway? You do not even know who your real enemy is, yet you are here barking at me." I stared down at her with absolutely zero pity. "Did you leave your brain in Australia, Beatrix?" Hearing me call her an idiot, she tried to scramble up to attack me again. "That is enough," Serafina glared at Beatrix, her voice holding a deadly warning. "Haven't you been over in Australia long enough?" Beatrix shrieked. "Sister, you are taking his side over mine? What is so great about him anyway? No body, no status, he is just a pathetic orphan." I stepped forward and landed a sharp slap across Beatrix's face. "So what if I am an orphan? I still have 10 times more manners than a spoiled brat like you." I turned a freezing look toward Serafina. "Serafina, leash your dog." She clenched her fists, her face pale and rigid, before snapping at her secretary. "Miss Higgins, take my sister to the hospital." The assistant did not hesitate. She grabbed the screaming Beatrix by the arm, practically dragging her from the hall. Caspian Serafina looked at me, her eyes heavy with guilt. "About today, Miss Sterling, you are apologizing to the wrong person." I cut her off with a cold, formal tone. Right then, Orion, having been urgently summoned to the scene by the family butler, arrived. Since it was his family banquet, he had already gotten the full rundown of the drama on his way over. He walked straight past Serafina without a single glance, immediately checking on his wife and brother. "Are you two hurt?" Once we shook our heads, Orion finally turned his icy stare onto Serafina. "Regarding today's absolute circus, my legal team will contact Miss Sterling to discuss compensation for the damages." With that, he had the butler take Genevieve and me upstairs to rest. The banquet continued smoothly after that minor disruption. It was late into the night when Serafina finished sorting out the damage compensation with Orion's butler and finally went home. When she got back, the Sterling estate was blazing with lights. The nanny ran up, panicking. "Please, eldest miss, go stop the master and madam. The second miss is still young." With those words, Serafina hurried into the main hall. She saw Beatrix kneeling, a massive swollen handprint on her face. On the sofa, Mrs. Sterling sat looking down, weeping quietly. Mr. Sterling stood over them, clutching a riding crop, his face twisted in absolute fury. "I see you have become a complete degenerate. Do you even know who Caspian is? You know his status in Orion's family, yet you still dare provoke him?" The Sterling family's main business was mostly overseas, so Mr. Sterling spent almost all his time abroad. Domestic affairs were supposedly managed by Mrs. Sterling, and only this year did Mr. Sterling shift his focus back home. When the butler recounted the absolute psychotic nonsense these women had pulled over the years, Mr. Sterling nearly passed out from pure rage. Before heading abroad, he knew he would be incredibly busy. So he specifically left his most trusted assistant and senior butler behind to help his wife manage everything. Yet before he had even been abroad for a month, both the assistant and butler flew out to hand him their resignations. When he asked why, he found out that the moment Mrs. Sterling took power, she fired his trusted staff for her own cronies. Later, while abroad, he heard rumors that Serafina had crashed her car twice over some white moonlight obsession, completely neglecting her husband. That is when he realized Serafina was being systematically ruined by Mrs. Sterling's toxic parenting. The Sterlings had always been decisive, ruthless, and independent. They prioritized the family's interests above everything. Even with massive heartbreak, they would bounce back instantly. Never would they expect a man to waste 5 years of his life acting as an emotional pacifier. And Beatrix had become an arrogant tyrant, constantly bullying classmates at school. Mrs. Sterling's solution was just throwing money at the victims to shut them up, never once actually disciplining Beatrix. This toxic environment led to me being relentlessly abused by those sisters for 5 years after our marriage. Yet, Mrs. Sterling did absolutely nothing to stop it. "Since you do not understand basic rules, stay in Australia forever. You are never coming back, Dad." Kneeling on the floor, Beatrix screamed in absolute terror. Serafina quickly stepped in to defend her. "Dad, she is still young." "Young? She is in her 20s, yet acts like an idiot. And what about you? Is your brain filled with nothing but trashy romance novels?" Watching her daughters get completely destroyed, Mrs. Sterling finally spoke up to defend them. The moment she spoke, Mr. Sterling remembered she was the root cause of this whole disaster. You heard that your successor put herself in the hospital twice over a man and threatened suicide, and yet you just stood by and enabled her. His fury reignited like a flamethrower. They act like absolute idiots, and you just play along. If she wants to kill herself over some man, let her. It is not like our family lacks capable heirs. She is an adult. What kind of garbage values did you teach her? She completely disrespects her husband. Even her elders get abused by her. What exactly have you been doing all these years? As her mother and sister got torn apart, Serafina felt some sympathy, but one lethal glare from Mr. Sterling nailed her in place. You and your sister, get into my study. I will deal with you in a minute. The living room was left to just the parents. Mr. Sterling stared down at his weeping, pathetic excuse of a wife, his face hardened with sheer disappointment. I am staying in the country from now on. Pack your bags and move to the mountain sanatorium to recover your health. With those few words, he basically sentenced Mrs. Sterling to life in exile. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she asked, "Do you really hate me that much?" He just stared back coldly. "If I truly hated you, those divorce papers would be on your desk already." He didn't wait for her reply, marching straight to the study where Serafina and Betry stood waiting in terrified, dead silence. To them, their father had always been just a distant figure working far away. They were much closer to their mother. Right now, the air in the study felt absolutely suffocating. The wall clock ticked on. Finally, with a face like a dark thundercloud, he snapped Beatrix, "You are returning to Australia immediately. My team will seize and hold your passport. You are banned from returning to this country without my direct permission." Then, he turned those cold eyes toward his eldest daughter, Serafina. His gaze was filled with pure disgust. "You were so busy chasing a man. Did you even look at the company financial reports? Starting today, your second uncle's son will temporarily take over as the CEO. You will start over at the absolute bottom as a basic clerk. We can talk about the leadership role when you prove you have a brain. Both of your credit cards are cut off immediately. My assistant will send you a tight monthly allowance. Also, your company shares are frozen until further notice. We will talk about this when you learn how to act like real human beings." Every single word made Beatrix look paler. Serafina stayed silent, but her fists were clenched so hard, her knuckles turned white. Word of the sudden shift in the Sterling Group leadership ripped through high society like a wildfire. Genevieve gossiped about it non-stop while helping me pack my bags. "You have barely been home a month and you are already flying back to Italy?" I packed my last shirt and nodded. "I have to. My only plan was to keep Orion company for the show. Now that it was done, there was no reason to stay. Orion's family had some messy local business to settle, so he and Genevieve were staying behind for now, planning to meet me abroad later. Besides, if I stayed around, I was bound to keep bumping into Serafina. Since she lost her executive job, she had endless free time, and I had absolutely zero interest in playing games with her. I zipped up my bag and pulled it to the door. Genevieve slid over with a mischievous grin. "Hey, do you remember Julian?" My hand froze at the door. Julian. It had been forever since I heard that name. Didn't he follow his ex-wife back to America? Whatever happened to him after that? I never cared enough to ask. Genevieve unlocked her phone and thrust a US tabloid piece in my face. "Julian is paralyzed." My jaw dropped. Reading the article, I saw his life in America was no fairy tale. Even with his ex-wife looking out for him, the Yang family, Octavia's people, despised him for what he did. During a massive fight, Julian lost his balance and fell down a whole flight of stairs. Meanwhile, nasty rumors of Octavia cheating on him blew up in the tabloids. The toxic mix of drama and karma triggered brutal, daily fights between them. Nobody really knows how things ended up after that. Genevieve slipped her phone away. "Because Orion's family has ties to the Yangs, Julian learned you two were brothers. He begged Orion to tell you how sorry he is." I processed this in silence. In a normal world, Julian and I would never have crossed paths at all. When I wed Serafina, Julian was already married and living abroad. If Serafina hadn't bounced back and forth between us like a lunatic, none of this disaster would have happened. Ultimately, all of the blame rested squarely on Serafina. But since everyone knew I was moving back to Italy, probably never to return, my local friends decided to throw me a massive farewell party. In the private club, empty bottles quickly piled up like bowling pins. We wanted to hit another club, but I didn't want to make Genevieve worry, so I politely opted out of the second round. After waving goodbye to my friends, I stood by the curb trying to hail a cab. A car horn beeped right beside me. "Caspian, get in." Seeing Serafina behind the wheel, I frowned and stepped back. But she just sat there, projecting a clear message that she wasn't leaving without me. Her car was blocking traffic, and with a line of drivers honking furiously behind us, I reluctantly climbed into the back seat. Serafina smiled faintly, said nothing, and just drove. We did not exchange a single word until the engine finally died right outside Orion's estate. Just as I mumbled a quick thanks and reached for the door handle, Serafina suddenly called my name. "Caspian." My hand froze on the handle. I stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror, completely confused. Caspian, if that debt contract never existed, and Julian was gone, would we still be together? Her voice held a sad, desperate hope like the punchline of some terrible joke. I actually laughed out loud. Then, I spelled it out for her slowly. Given how hopelessly obsessed you were with Julian for years, we were always destined to fail. In the mirror, I watched total desolation crush her face. And honestly, even without any of that, we still would not be together. As my wife, you knew absolutely nothing about me, not even my allergies, never one single gift. From start to finish, you treated me like I was completely worthless. The only reason you missed me was because I acted like your personal slave for 5 years. You were just experiencing withdrawal symptoms. That is not real love. Want to know what genuine love actually is? It means loyalty from start to finish. It means trading a true heart for a true heart. True devotion means remembering every little detail about the other person, being so determined to grow old together that you destroy any toxic outside threat. It means standing firmly by my side, trusting and defending me, actually listening when I explain things. It is not running to someone else the second we have a misunderstanding. And when disaster strikes, it is choosing me instantly, without a single second of hesitation. Which of those things could you ever actually do? A spoiled princess in an ivory tower only ever knew how to demand love from others. She never spent 1 second learning how to actually love someone back. If Serafina had even an ounce of real self-awareness, otherwise, she would not have constantly flown across the world to stalk her childhood crush while married to me. Sneaking around, comforting a married man, triggering total chaos for both of our marriages. She never cared about my feelings for a second. I kept pushing ruthlessly. If not for that debt repayment deal, our paths would never have crossed, and I would be living my own brilliant life. Serafina stared at me, dumbfounded. A bitter, suffocating agony swelled in her throat. She parted her lips, desperate to say something, but in the end, absolutely nothing came out. She could only watch in silence as I pushed the door open and stepped out. Just as I was about to walk through the estate gates, a blinding pair of high beams flashed directly into my eyes. I threw my arm up to shield my eyes. Then came the ear-piercing screech of locking tires and Serafina screaming in pure terror. The culprit behind this attempt on Caspian's life was Beatrix. Blinded by pure, unadulterated rage, her mind had completely snapped. Certain that I was the only reason her life was ruined, she lost control, slipped her bodyguards, and floored the gas pedal straight at me. But in a sudden twist of fate, Serafina reacted with lightning speed and shoved me aside. Except for a few minor scrapes, I was completely untouched. Serafina, however, took the absolute brunt of the impact, leaving both of her legs permanently paralyzed, but she also spent over a month clinging to life in the ICU before Orion's family even had to lift a finger. Mr. Sterling, upon hearing the news, personally had Beatrix thrown into a maximum security prison. As for when she would get out, nobody knew or cared. During her stay in the hospital, I visited Serafina once. After all, she did risk her own life to save mine. Staring at her body hooked up to breathing tubes and monitors, I let out a long sigh, completely overwhelmed. It seemed she had finally listened to that speech I gave her in the car, but for me, it was simply too late. Serafina only saved me in a desperate, last-ditch effort to make up for her past failures. I stood by her bedside for a long time before finally turning and walking away. Because of the accident, my flight back to Italy was inevitably put on hold. For the next few months, I stayed at Orion's estate, healing up from my minor scrapes. Then one morning, I heard Serafina had finally woken up. When they told her that Beatrix was the driver who hit her, and that both of her legs were paralyzed, she did not even throw a tantrum. Instead, she was disturbingly quiet. That very same day, while packing my bags, I found a ring buried deep in the back of a drawer. It was the ring I had pulled from the bottom of the ocean. The exact same ring Serafina had used to propose to me. Over 7 years, without any care, the embedded diamond had fallen out long ago, leaving the band rusted and corroded. I rubbed the tarnished ring between my fingers for a very long time. Maybe this rusted ring was the final answer to that question she asked me in the car. During our 5-year marriage, I was always the only one paying the emotional bills. She just sat back and let my suffering keep her comfortable. Without any effort from her, our marriage had rusted out, just like this metal. So, forget about Julian or the contract. Without her doing a single thing, our marriage was doomed from the start. I snapped the box shut, handed the ring to Orion's butler, and told him to drop it off with Serafina. When Serafina saw that rusted band, she froze. Staring at it, she realized she had never actually given me a real gift in her entire life. The only cheap ring she ever bought had been carelessly handed off to Julian. A friend visiting her in the hospital caught sight of the ring and gasped. She asked if that was the same ring from their old cruise ship bet. Looking at the metal, the memory of throwing it into the pitch black, crashing ocean flooded right back into Serafina's mind. She remembered the wild wager. Whichever partner got it back would win a massive piece of real estate. Sure, it was just a game, but they had tied the ring to a thick fishing line before throwing it. Still, none of the rich kids dared to jump into those black, terrifying waves. Except for me. I just looked at the guy who started the bet and asked if he was serious. Once he nodded, I grabbed the transfer agreement. Then, I dove into the black abyss. Watching my skinny frame get swallowed by the massive waves, Serafina gripped the cruise ship railing until her knuckles went bone white. A suffocating panic completely seized her chest. In that terrifying split second, she almost dove in after me. But then I broke through the surface, gasping for air and holding that ring like a lifeline. Once they hauled me up, she locked me in a desperate, shaking hug. She was drowning in pure terror and a strange, unfamiliar feeling. She had been so afraid I would disappear into that dark ocean forever. Only now, sitting alone in a wheelchair, did she finally realize what she was feeling. It was love. She had fallen for me the very second I leaped into that freezing ocean for her. Now, those buried memories hit her like a physical blow. She hid her face in her hands and completely broke down, sobbing hysterically. The butler did not get back to Orion's estate until late that night, and he was not alone. Behind him was an entire delivery truck packed to the ceiling with boxes. I just stared at the mountain of gifts, completely speechless. The butler explained that Miss Sterling had cried for hours after seeing the ring, then made some frantic phone calls to order a truckload of gifts. She claimed it was all compensation for me. I stared at the massive pile for a long moment before slowly slicing open the first box. That was when I realized Serafina had bought me a retroactive gift for every single year of my life from age 1 to 18. Plus, she bought presents for every single birthday, anniversary, New Year, and Valentine's Day we shared during our 5-year marriage. Every single item was picked to match my exact tastes. Things she could have done with a simple phone call 5 years ago. Now, she was exactly 7 years too late. I set the last gift down, stood up, and looked at the butler. Tell them to sell it all, and donate every penny to the orphanage. Soon, the day of my departure arrived. Not knowing when we would ever meet again, Orion and Genevieve cleared their schedules for a final, massive farewell tour. We watched the beach sunset and rode the Ferris wheel. We ate cheap street food on the corner and absurdly expensive Michelin star desserts. This was easily the happiest time of my entire 20-some years on this earth. Genevieve kept piling food onto my plate like a nagging mother hen, telling me to eat up because finding these authentic flavors abroad would be impossible. Sure, they had hired a personal chef and a housekeeper to move abroad with me, but replicating the taste of home in a new country is never quite the same. I nodded quietly, stuffing my face with whatever she put in front of me. On the day of my flight, I spotted a familiar face waiting at the airport. It was Serafina, and I had absolutely no idea why. Seeing her sitting quietly in that wheelchair, I felt a tiny spark of pity. I crushed it instantly, offering nothing but a polite, cold smile and a simple goodbye. Returning to Italy, I did not go back to my tiny cramped apartment. Instead, I moved into a beautiful villa Orion and Genevieve had bought just for me. The 2 staff members they sent got the house in perfect order, and my new chef immediately started prepping meals. Over the next week, between catching up with old friends, I spent my time scouting locations for my next art show. I was incredibly busy but completely happy, until one night my phone rang. It was not Orion, nor Genevieve, it was the director of my old orphanage. She called to break the news that Mrs. Sterling had passed away. The director had zero clue about the twisted psychological warfare between me and the Sterling family. To her, Mrs. Sterling was just my generous sponsor. She gently suggested that I should return to attend the funeral and pay my last respects. So, I booked a flight. But seeing the Sterling estate draped in white funeral banners made my chest tighten with unexpected weight. After all, she did pay for my entire education. Showing up was just the right thing to do. Entering the morning hall, I noticed other students the Sterlings had sponsored over the years. We nodded politely to each other, but said nothing. Over the phone, the director had explained how she died. Apparently, her health had already been failing for a while, and after Mr. Sterling banished her to that mountain sanatorium, her health just completely bottomed out. They had hidden everything from her. She had no idea Beatrix was in prison or that Serafina was paralyzed. But then Mrs. Sterling randomly decided she wanted to talk to Beatrix, thinking her daughter was just chilling in Australia. The phone just kept ringing. Terrified, she cornered the sanatorium nurses and demanded to know what was going on. Cracking under pressure, a nurse spilled the truth. How could anyone answer a phone from inside a maximum security prison? The sheer panic and shock triggered a massive, fatal heart attack. She died right then and there. Looking across the room, I saw Mr. Sterling. His hair had turned completely snow white. Next to him sat Serafina in her wheelchair, looking totally lifeless. Clutching a white chrysanthemum, I approached Mrs. Sterling's portrait. I bowed deeply 3 times and set the flower down right in front of her. For a long moment, I just stared at her picture. My feelings toward this woman were a complete mess. Gratitude. She ruined 5 years of my life. Hatred. But she also paid for the schooling that got me out of poverty. But you can never bring back the dead. All the bad blood, the bitterness, and the outstanding debts vanished like smoke when she died. Giving her portrait one last look, I walked over to Mr. Sterling and offered a small bow. I told him I was sorry for his loss, and he just nodded silently. Then, I turned to Serafina. I stared at her for a moment before quietly offering my condolences. She gave me a shattered, bitter smile but didn't say a word. Since she was immediate family, Beatrix was let out of prison under guard to attend the service. After experiencing the harsh reality of lockup, her smug, spoiled attitude had vanished entirely. She looked like nothing more than a hollow, lifeless shell. When she looked at me, there wasn't even a spark of recognition or anger. But seeing her mother's photo broke her. She fell to her knees, sobbing in pure, soul-crushing agony. People nearby looked away, unable to watch the heartbreaking breakdown. On the day we buried her, a cold, miserable rain fell from the sky. Powerful families sent people to pay their respects. That was when Orion and Genevieve discovered I had quietly flown back. They weren't mad, but I still felt like I needed to explain myself. Genevieve held me close, whispering that if they ever threatened me again, she and Orion would ruin them. Under a shared black umbrella, Genevieve and I watched them lower Mrs. Sterling's coffin into the ground. A few feet away, Beatrix screamed and wept so hard she almost fainted, while 2 guards held her back. Once it was over, the crowd slowly thinned out. Genevieve and I lingered, quietly talking about my plans for the next art show. Caspian Serafina's voice suddenly came from behind me. I turned around. She was sitting in her wheelchair, getting drenched by the cold rain, just staring. She asked if I could walk with her. Genevieve instantly shot me a worried look. One look from me and Genevieve would have shut her down without hesitation. I squeezed the umbrella handle, then forced myself to relax. The rain started pouring. I kept the umbrella over Serafina as we began to move. Their butler rushed up to push her wheelchair toward the gate, holding an umbrella over himself as he walked. Caspian, she whispered. I don't have a home anymore. Hearing this, the butler froze in his tracks. I paused and looked down. Her mother was dead. Her sister was in a high-security prison. She was permanently paralyzed. And her father, busy hunting for a new heir, was barely around and had already abandoned the funeral. She parted her lips to say something else, but realized there was nothing left to say. Honestly, what was there to say? Hadn't they spent years treating each other exactly like this? Perhaps realizing the brutal irony of it all, Serafina let out a broken, agonizing laugh, wondering how wonderful it would be to just start over. She sobbed that she could have loved me with all her heart. We would not have ended up like this, and she wouldn't be destined to die alone. But real life has no reset button, I told her, as the sound of the rain faded. My voice reached her with absolute clarity. Life does not offer do-overs. We can only move forward, and whether it is you or me, we just have to keep walking. There will never be a fresh start for us. This was the 3rd year since our divorce, and the first time we spoke with such absolute, quiet calm. I told her we should just part ways amicably. Back when we first met at the exhibition, I had told her the exact same thing. Back then, her head was too full of toxic delusions about winning me back to understand the finality of my words. Then, the rain suddenly stopped. I snapped my umbrella shut and turned toward the heavy iron gates of the cemetery. Let's never meet again. My figure slowly faded away, vanishing from her sight and from her life forever.